All set? Already? Okay. All right. Good afternoon, and welcome to our ceremony today. We are so grateful you are here. My name is Paula Dusseljay. I'm the pastoral assistant here at First Lutheran Muskegon, and what an honor to be invited into this time of remembrance. We are grateful you are here.
Hi, I'm Alan Alpert, and
You might have turned it.
we have to figure out do we have anybody under the age of 10 that can help?
Just have to turn it on. Let's see. There you go.
Okay. I am Alan Alpert. I'm the treasurer of what was the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Today we will rededicate it, and it will become the Anderson Center for Holocaust Studies. And we're very honored that Pastor Chris Anderson's widow Barbara is here, and his son Eric. And I know we'll be watching a video of Chris. It may be very tough. Chris was just incredible. Many of you knew him and know exactly what I'm talking about. Again, we'd like to thank First Lutheran for hosting this event. There'll be fantastic music that Pastor Ellen Sheffs arranged with the musicians. If you look at the last page, there is a acknowledgement of people that made it possible. I don't know if she's here, but Kaylee Loring did the video, and we're very grateful. I'd like to call also to the attention of everyone, members of our committee that are here. The chair is Anna Alpert, my wife, and unfortunately she was diagnosed with cancer and has been going through chemo, and she was hoping to be here. She had thought that she would be able to come yesterday, but was not able to do, and she also greets all of you. On our committee, I think rather than to acknowledging everybody, well, I can do it by name, in case I miss anyone. Adam Alderidge, if you want to stand, Adam. And Christine Renz, Ellen Sheffs, Robin Polika, and Sarah Wojciechowski could not be here today, and George Meniotis. And did I miss anyone? Okay. Again, thank you for coming. There are clergy. We're very grateful to you. Our speaker, too, Karen Shaw, flew in from the wonderful state of New Jersey, and we're delighted to have her here. She wondered if we had snow in March. I don't think I have to answer anymore. You should have a program, and we begin with the narrator, and I believe that's George Meniotis. And Adam, if you'd like to take a seat up here too, you're welcome to.
Afternoon. On this day, we mark the 30th year our Muskegon community has come together, seeking to remember those who were brought to destruction by the systematic terror orchestrated by the Nazi regime in Germany from 1933 to 1945. As we gather here for this service of remembrance of the Holocaust, we begin in silence. Let us surround our worship and our community in prayer with a time of silence, silence in preparation for the presence of God. Silence does not just bring words and noise to a standstill. Silence is more than a temporary renunciation of speech. It is a door opening before prayer towards the very realms of the spirit and the heart. Silence is the beginning of a reckoning of the soul, the prelude to an account of the past and the consideration of the present. May our shared silence lead us to an awareness of a time of total evil that degraded our most precious values, the very meaning of religious existence and the meaning of life itself. Our silence is to be a committed accounting for other silences that accepted persecutions and were indifferent to the debasement and crime. On this day, we not only remember the Holocaust, but we also remember a dear friend, the Reverend Chris Anderson, who was instrumental in the founding of the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies in Muskegon County. He established the first of these remembrance services 30 years ago. So on this day, as we remember Chris and the work he did, we therefore renamed this organization the Anderson Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. It is a fitting tribute to his vision and work. Renaming the organization honors his memory. We begin our remembering by viewing a commemoration video.
The words of Ralph McGill, who was the editor of the Atlanta Constitution at the time, goes like this. It is not possible to preach lawlessness and restrict it. You do not preach and encourage hatred for the Negro and hope to restrict it to that field. It is an old, old story. It is one repeated over and over again in history. When the wolves of hate are loosed on one people, then no one is safe.
I was 4 when I lost my world, 9 when I became a survivor of Auschwitz. But here I am today, a wife, mother, and grandmother. Think how many children and grandchildren those 6 million would have if they had lived. These Jews died without a trace. And I feel a responsibility to make sure that the story of how they died is not forgotten.
I always want to give homage to my sister. We had people who were able to help her escape. She refused to escape because she was a medical student and she was taking care of the children in the camp. So you have to remember that if people don't fight but save other people, that's an act of resistance too.
The principal came to our classroom and told us to go home. Don't stop anywhere. Don't speak to anyone. Go directly to your homes. I was about 12 years old at that time. I hopped on a bike, about a half-hour bicycle ride from the school to my home. I saw men walking on the sidewalks with signs around their neck. I am a Jew. I'm an enemy of the state. I don't deserve to live. That was the beginning of a terrible period which became known in history as the Night of the Broken Glass. German word was Kristallnacht. So I think the secret is when you see someone being bullied, even if it's on a small scale, you have the obligation to stand up and say, this is not right. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's the right thing to do because keep in mind, if you don't do it, who will? And also keep in mind, if you don't stand up to it today, it will be you tomorrow.
So it's very different now. These students are well educated in Germany. They know what happened. Do they want us to talk about it? No, of course not. Why? Because because they don't want to talk about their grandparents. And that's my job. I need to talk about it. I want to talk about it. I want to educate. Remember, each one of you can make a difference in making this a better world. As we say in Hebrew, Takun Olam, which means repairing the world. Thank you.
There's an old Chinese tale. There's a village surrounded by a huge forest, and to get to the next big town, you had to traverse that forest, and it was rumored that a very bad ogre was inhabiting that, and it was very dangerous. So he went to his next door neighbor and he said, you know, I'm kind of scared. Will you accompany me? He said, sure. And they crossed, and good grief, nothing happened. They were almost inside of the next city, and he turned around to his neighbor and said, you know, we have made it. And then he looked back again, and the ogre was his neighbor.
I learned about the kinder transport and how Winton, his effort was to try to get children out on a program called the kinder transport. And the picture that I'll never forget is my mom. She is crying, more than just crying. She was so hysterical. That's the last picture I have. After that, I never saw it again. People would ask me, have you ever forgiven your parents for letting you go? I said, forgiven? I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them.
One day I was going in town with my mother, always holding on very, very firmly to her hand, and I saw my Hebrew teacher kneeling on the ground, on the pavement in the middle of the city, on the road. In his hand he had a toothbrush, and he was cleaning the road. And the Gestapo, the police, were kicking him around, and that was what he was commanded to do.
I have learned in my studies of the Holocaust over the past several years that we do not merely remember the events. The events give us numbers great and numbers small. What we are here to do is to remember people, individuals who lived an ordinary life, and to remember them one person at a time.
As part of Chris's vision, the journey was created. 3 groups of Muskegon area students studied the Holocaust and genocide for an entire school year. At the conclusion of that year, they traveled to Washington, D.C. to the U.S. Holocaust Museum, Memorial Museum, and to share and to learn from current events. They met with our senators and representatives, and we are fortunate today to have one of those students, Silencia Crowley-Picard, and I'd like to ask her to come up and to tell us about her experience.
Where do you want me to stand?
Right there?
Right here?
Mhm.
All right.
Okay, and do you have it turned on?
Yep.
Okay.
I think I got this all fit. Can everyone hear me? All right.
Okay. Silencia is not used to be talking in public. She's got a, no. She, one of the refreshing things about her when she was interviewed, she would say what she thought. And everybody appreciated that. And I don't think she's changed.
I haven't much. But I haven't spoken in public in a very long time, so I'm a little nervous right now.
Okay, well, they're all friends, so why did you apply for the journey?
I initially applied for the journey because I was told to. My grandmother and Pastor Chris Anderson know me to be very outspoken and say exactly what's on my mind, and they knew, I think before I did, that I would be a good fit for the journey. And so originally, I was given the application and told, you're going to be involved in this, and more power to you. And then after I filled out the incredibly long application, you had to have references and all kinds of things. There was a day, and I can't remember exactly. Mind you, this was 20 years ago. I was thinking about it the other day when I was preparing for today, that I am 33 years old, and I was 13 when I would join the very first class of the Journey program. So I had to really dig back a little bit, but I remember coming into the Journey not really knowing quite what to expect. And then from day one, I mean, I made so many good friends, and I learned so much about the Holocaust and about my community, and it was, by definition, a life-changing opportunity for me.
Thank you. And then please tell us what meeting of the journey was like. What did you do?
So the meeting of the journey, I remember we used to have all these round tables, and we would separate into groups, and we would just discuss different things that we had learned about prior. We'd have these group settings, and it was a lot of discussion about our community and leadership in our community and how we could be a part of the change and make a difference. I think one of the things that was in the God, now I can't think of the name of it.
The video?
Yeah, the video in this little paper guy was about, we went to Washington, D.C. at the end, the accumulation of the Journey program. And so leading up to that was a lot of different discussions about how we could impact our community, how we could move forward, how we could spread the word of what was going on with the Holocaust and genocide, and how we could be a part of building diversity and inclusion and really touching on our capacity for change.
Okay. Do you feel that you benefited from this experience?
Yes, yes I do. Looking back, especially looking at the video, Pastor Chris, this kind of goes with Pastor Chris. For me, I have known Pastor Chris since I was born. He baptized me. I was in his very first communion class, or very last communion class. My mom was in his very first. So I've known Pastor Chris from my first breath to his last. And he's a huge part of my life. He made a huge difference for me in introducing me to the journey and being able to be a part of that and learning so much. I mean, I knew a lot about the Holocaust in the sense that I read The Giver, and I read Diary of Anne Frank, and I think I might have even watched like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. But there's nothing quite like going to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. I remember all of us when we went there, and we go in talking and laughing and giggling, and we left in complete silence. We left with so much on our hearts and minds, and I mean, even the bus ride home from Washington, D.C., I think felt heavier and more significant than the ride there. And really understanding the extent of that time period and that genocide, I think, hit home for a lot of us. You know, being in Muskegon, we see a lot of violence. We are in communities, especially I grew up really poor, and I've seen a lot of things that I don't think I should have seen. I've lost a lot of friends. And being able to recognize that, it sounds kind of horrible to say, but being able to recognize that bad things happen everywhere and to people that don't deserve it. And you get to have a chance to connect, but you also get a chance to fully understand that you can be a part of making the world a better place just by being kind and open and understanding and listening and having an open mind. You can have the capacity for change. And I think that was probably the biggest lesson I learned with the journey.
And the last question, but anything you want to say besides the question is fine. How would you describe the journey to someone?
The journey was a unique learning experience. There were some times I remember it being a little boring, and then other times really exciting. And I made so many I'm good friends with my friend Shelby Stokes. She was also in the very first Journey program with me. It was an opportunity to meet new people. It was an opportunity to develop lifelong friendships, learn about our history and culture, and just build that capacity for change. Little side note, when we did go to Washington, D.C., I went with all of my questions ready to grill our state senator, and Pastor Chris was both embarrassed and very proud of me at the time because I grilled our senator with all kinds of really hard questions, but I think being a part of the journey gave me the confidence to do that. Though that year in the Journey program helped me to go forward and feel comfortable and strong enough to ask those hard-hitting questions and take that knowledge and that self-assuredness that I had gained in the journey out into the world.
And Silencia, is there anything more that you want to say, or can you just go, it's over?
I think I'm going to go with the it's over and have a seat.
Anyway, we're very proud. We had 3 classes that went to Washington, D.C., and we're very proud of Silencia and all those that now, it's hard to believe, but these 13-year-olds are now in their 30s.
Oh, yeah.
Time goes fast.
It does go fast.
Thank you, Silencia.
You're welcome.
And if I may ask you to stand for the call to worship. Praise and proclaim God's name, to whom all praise is due.
Praise and proclaim be the name of God, to whom all praise is due, now and forever.
Please be seated.
Out of silence and darkness, the creative word of God was spoken. It first took the form of wind, or ruach, God's spirit hovering over the waters of chaos to control them, to hold them back, and to make possible the goodness of creation itself.
When God began to create the heaven and the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw how good the light was, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness God called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, a first day. And God said, "I will make man in my image, after my likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth. And God created human beings in God's image. In the image of God, He created them, male and female. He created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth." And God said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food, and to all the animals on land, to all the birds of the sky, and to everything that creeps on earth, in which there is the breath of life, I give all the green plants for food." And it was so. And God said all that God had made, and found it very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. The heaven and earth were finished, and all their array. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that God had been doing. And God ceased on the seventh day from all the work which God had done. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because on it ceased from all the work of creation that God had done.
But there can be another type of silence and another type of wind. At a time of horror in the middle of the 20th century, the silence of the world made possible the monstrous crime of genocide, the attempted murder of a whole people for no other reason than they were a particular type of people, a people called by God, the chosen people, the Jews.
In the heart of civilized Europe, aided by the silence of so many of the nations and peoples of the world, a wind of abomination and racial hostility, a wind of evil, whipped a continent into a frenzy of senseless killing. In Hebrew, this destructive event, the Nazi murder of 2/3 of European Jewry, is likened to the Shoah of the biblical text, of devastating, diabolical wind that scours the earth of all life, leaving only chaos and death in its wake. 6 million Jewish men and women, 1 million children among them, were taken by other human beings to die in gas and fire. Their very ashes spewed from the chimneys of Auschwitz to mingle with the soft breezes of the air and fall, nameless and graveless, spread over a continent that had itself become a graveyard.
Not only did Jews die, caught in the eddies and swirls of the Holocaust, millions of Poles and Gypsies, Russians, and other Europeans also ended their lives as victims of Nazism's diabolically efficient technology of death. But to be Jewish in Nazi Europe of itself meant alienation and death.
Martin Niemöller, a pastor in the German Confessing Church, spent 8.5 years in a concentration camp. He wrote, "First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out, because I was not communist. Then came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me.
A psalm of suffering. Lord, my God, I call for help all day. I cry to you all night. May my prayer reach you. Hear my cries for help. For my soul is troubled. My life is on the brink of Sheol. I am numbered among those who go down into the pit, a person bereft of strength. A person down among the dead, among the slaughtered in their graves, among those you have forgotten, those deprived of your protecting hand. You have plunged me to the bottom of the pit, to its darkest, deepest place, weighted down by your anger, drowned beneath your waves. You have turned my friends against me and made me repulsive to them. In prison and unable to escape, my eyes are worn out with suffering. Lord, I invoke you all day. I stretch out my hands to you. Are your marvels meant for the dead, and can ghosts rise up to praise you? Who talks of your love in the grave, of your faithfulness in the place of perdition? Do they hear about your marvels in the dark and your righteousness in the land of oblivion? But I am here, calling for your help, praying to you for every morning. Why do you reject me? Why do you hide your face from me? Wretched, slowly dying since my youth, I bore your terrors. Now I am exhausted. Your anger overwhelmed me. You destroyed me with your terrors, which, like a flood, were round me all day long, altogether closing in on me. You have turned my friends and neighbors against me. Now darkness is my one friend left.
We now light 6 candles in memory of the 6 million. We also light 5 candles for the 5 million who were slaughtered because they were gypsies, mentally and physically disabled, of Slavic descent, political dissenters, pastors and priests, people of color, those whose religious convictions would not allow them to support the regime. We also remember the victims of religious, racial, and cultural genocide committed since the Shoah. Russians under Stalin, Cambodia, Uganda, Rwanda, Darfur and Sudan, Iraq, Angola, and Ethiopia. If you have been asked to light a candle, please join me towards the front of the room.
Would you please stand? We remember the 6 million by reciting the Kaddish, the traditional Jewish prayer for the dead. This prayer is not a funeral hymn, but an affirmation of God's everlasting presence and dominion, praising God's existence and creative love. It is in this spirit that we pray the Kaddish, remembering the victims of the Holocaust. We also pray for the survivors, those whose faith in life enabled them to rebuild in other countries their shattered lives, their destroyed worlds. Joining together, they brought about new life. They raised new families in new lands, in defiance of absolute terror and despair, and invincible hope. Exalted by that spirit of life-giving and faith, we pray today.
Yitgadavi Kadashime Rabbi Alma Divrach Hirteviam Lich Malchute, Vachai Chonimechon Vachai Lecho Beit Yisrael, Bagalaus Man Karivim Ru Amen. Yeshme Rabba Mevorach, Leolam O Meomaya, Yitbarach, Yitbarach Vishtabach Vipar Vitrama Vinase Vitadar Vitale Vitalau, Shme Dekud Shap Richu. Lelemi kober chata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechemata, da'amiram be'alma, v'imru amen. Ose yehi shalom arava min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Ose shalom b'imrumav, hui aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'kol b'nei adam, v'imru amen. We read together in English the entirety of the starting with, may God be praised until the end. Together, may God praise throughout all times. Together, to glorified and exalted, lauded and praised. Amen. Please be seated. This has been an exceptional occasion. 30 years ago, Pastor Chris Anderson approached me and said, "Would you be willing to have a Jewish Christian service of remembrance?" And I said, yes. From that time, and many of you are here that can recall what happened 30 years ago and how it grew and how it slowed down a great deal because of the pandemic. Chris's vision made it very important for us to see and to continue. One of the things that we did for many summers, we went down to La Crosse, Wisconsin. There was a consortium of Holocaust educators, and one of the greatest teachers we had was Karen Shawn. And believe it or not, she has a connection to Muskegon. It's the snow. I'm kidding. But her cousin Bob Skolnick is here, and many of you know him, and we talked about him when we were there. Bob, we didn't say anything bad about you. But in any case, you can take a look for yourselves with the tremendous biography that Karen has. More so, if you spend any time with her, is her humanity, her concern for others, her love of everyone. And Chris had a great deal of admiration for her. And Chris studied the Holocaust more than anybody in this area. He went to Dropsy. He received a license in terms of teaching and then got a master's degree. He very much appreciated any opportunity we could have to have Karen come to speak with us. And this year, we said it would be very, very special if Karen could come and to inaugurate the Anderson Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Read her biography, but with deep humility, I ask Karen Shawn to come and to talk to us.
Thank you, Rabbi. I think I feel more comfortable standing
That's fine.
close to my audience. As a teacher, I have to walk around and say, "Come on, put it down. Let's make sure." So that's what I'm used to doing. Can everyone hear me? Good? Okay. I'm so moved and so touched by this gathering and by what I've heard. I was going to say it's such a pleasure. It's so much more than a pleasure. It's such an honor to be with you today, and I'm grateful that you have asked me to come. I thank especially, of course, Rabbi Alan Alpert and Rebbitzin Anna Alpert, who couldn't be with us today. She's the chair of the newly named Anderson Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and I thank them for inviting me. I thank all of you for coming, especially. I was afraid no one would come when I saw that it started to snow, but especially my amazing Muskegon cousin, Bob Skolnick, and his dear friend and synagogue president, Lee Fonstein. And I thank as well Pastor Bill Utrecht of the First Lutheran Church, who is hosting us. Today, I pay tribute to our beloved Pastor Chris Anderson, and to do so, I'll share several stories, different stories, about the power of listening, the special kind of listening that the pastor did so well. The stories are disparate. They'll touch on Israel, the Holocaust, the Torah, the Jewish holiday of Purim, October 7th, and anti-Semitism. But they're pulled together by the common thread of the learning, the teaching, and the goodness of Pastor Chris. My husband and I just returned from Israel a few weeks ago, and we spent time, as we always do, walking through what's called the Machane Yehuda Shuk, which is the famous open-air fruit and vegetable market in Jerusalem. I saw shoppers burdened with bags and bundles, and I recalled a project called in Hebrew, Geveret im Salim, in English, Lady with Baskets, named after a popular Israeli nursery rhyme. It began there in 2011, and it lasted for several years, probably almost until COVID. A group called the Good Neighbor Association, together with Israel's Hillel Association, coordinated the undertaking, which was a regular feature of the market scene. Each Thursday afternoon, between 4 and 6 p.m., especially large numbers of senior citizens do their Sabbath shopping at the Shuk. And so at that time, every week, some 30 young people, many from Hebrew University, donned bright yellow shirts or vests and strolled through the market for the sole purpose of helping seniors, and anyone else who asked, carry their heavy bundles to the bus stop, their car, or even to nearby homes. The service was gracious and free. All the helpers asked in return was that the people they helped tell them a little story about their life or give them some advice while they walked together. I was always struck by the humanity of these actions, by the ability of these few students to seek the individuality of the elderly people who frequent the market, instead of seeing simply the bustling crowds or the content of the place that so overwhelms so many visitors. And there was no room for politics there. These students, from the most secular to the most religious, helped Arab and Jewish shoppers alike. What gift did they offer these shoppers, along with lightening their burdens? They focused on their personhood when they asked for something in return for their help, not a tip, but a story, making clear that the personal experiences of these older people have value, that they mean something to the young people who would listen fully and with an open heart to whatever story they were told. An 18th century Ukrainian rabbi called the Baal Shem Tov, credited with founding the Hasidic movement, explained that when a person speaks, a part of the essence of his soul emerges. For real communication to occur, that part of the speaker's soul must touch that of the listener's soul. When that happens, the teller's story becomes rooted in the listener's heart. King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, requests an understanding heart, called in Hebrew a lev shomea, a heart that listens carefully. It's odd to think that a heart can listen, but in Psalm 19, we read that the heart can think. We pray, "Dear God, may the expressions of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart find favor before you." A famous educator named Eric Liu believes that great teachers are those who listen with full body intensity, who tune in to the unique and ever-fluctuating frequency of every learner. I believe that Chris, as a pastor, was one of those great teachers. I think that he was able to share a part of his soul with his congregants, his Jewish friends and colleagues, and his family, and that he also had a listening heart. This reciprocity between speakers and Pastor Chris, between him and those to whom he ministered and those he loved, was a vital part of him. I think of him when I remember this project in the market. I didn't know Chris well. I spent several days with him for several years at conferences at the consortium that the rabbi mentioned, and I had perhaps 7 long conversations with him on the phone. But from all that I felt from him and from all that I observed and all that I was told about him, it was clear to me that he was like those young people. He cared and he listened. I'm reminded of him again each time I teach a poem called Tourists by an Israeli poet called Yehuda Amichai, especially one particular section of that poem. The poet writes, Once, I sat on the steps by a gate at David's Tower. I placed my 2 heavy baskets at my side. A group of tourists was standing around their guide, and I became their target marker. You see that man with 2 baskets? Well, just right of his head, there's an arch from the Roman period, just right of his head. I said to myself, redemption will come only when the guide tells them, you see that arch from the Roman period? It's not important. But next to it, left and down a little bit, there sits a man who's bought fruit and vegetables for his family. Pastor Chris sought and saw the humanity in all of his parishioners, colleagues and friends, Jews and Christians alike. He recognized what was important and left aside what was not, and he listened fully to what they had to share. He was in the business of seeing men and women who fed their families, not Roman arches, and his listening heart brought us one step closer to redemption. I have no doubt that with all of the people who turned to him for guidance, learning, friendship, and comfort, he was sensitive and attentive. To do that, one needs to listen well and fully. At Yeshiva University, I teach graduate students about the Holocaust, and Pastor Chris and I spoke about that subject at length during our conferences and our phone calls. Rabbi Allen recently reminded me, as he mentioned up here, that Chris was a serious student of the subject, studying it on the graduate level at Gratz College and earning a master's degree in Holocaust and genocide in 2020. How do we know he listened fully as he learned? Because his studies led to his soul searching. He explained, my studies invited me to question my faith, my vocation, my theological understandings, thereby challenging me in my roles as chair of the Holocaust Center board where I live and as a serving pastor in the Lutheran Church. His ability to let words touch his heart was evident early on. The genesis of his interest in the Holocaust illustrates this perfectly. He told of being a child and helping his neighbor with some packages. It was a warm summer day, and the neighbor, who always wore long sleeves, had them on this day rolled up. Chris saw what appeared to be a number on his arm and asked about it. The neighbor, a thoughtful man, said he would first ask Chris's parents if it would be okay to tell him. His parents said yes, and so the neighbor explained very gently, without graphic details, what had happened to him. When he finished, he told Chris, I've told you my story. Now it's yours to tell. And because Chris listened with a full heart, the neighbor's story touched his soul and remained there, helping to inspire him to be a lifelong learner. Because he was a serious scholar, he probably already knew what I want to tell you now. A few years ago, I was privileged to have Dr. Deborah Lipstadt, now former Ambassador Lipstadt, our government's special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, come to one of my classes at YU. She told us that the widely accepted idea that in Israel the Holocaust was not talked about before the trial of the infamous Nazi Adolf Eichmann is a myth. Israeli documents show that throughout the 50s in Israel, the Holocaust was widely discussed in both the legislature and in public. And in fact, in 1956, 40,000 Israelis participated in Holocaust Remembrance Day ceremonies. So why then was the Eichmann trial in the 60s, broadcast on television around the world, perceived to be the event that broke the silence about the subject, when in fact there had been no silence? To answer that question, I turn again to the importance of a listening heart. And I turn also to a famous story from the Torah. Each week in our synagogue, we read a section from the Bible, and the portion of the week that we read at the end of December has a message that fits here with our subject today. That portion takes place 22 years after Joseph's brothers threw him into the pit. Now the brothers are together and remembering that day, and they say to one another, "Indeed, we are guilty concerning our brother. We saw his heartfelt anguish when he pleaded with us, and we paid no heed." But in the Parsha, the portion that we read just the week before, that recounts how the brothers stripped Joseph of his tunic, took him and cast him into the pit, we read nothing about his cries. There are no anguished pleas. Well, I always assumed that he was rendered mute by the shock of what his brothers had done to him. So why then would the brothers later refer to Joseph's heartfelt anguish and his pleading with them when it was never written that he did so? The Ramban, a famous Jewish commentator, has answers. He writes that Joseph did cry out, but his pleas are such an obvious response to his being thrown into the pit that they don't need to be explicitly stated. It's clear that he would cry out for help, so why mention it? We know the Torah doesn't waste words. The Ramban also suggests that the narrative condenses the tale in its most horrifying aspect so that the brothers' crime is left somewhat obscured. To have dwelt on Joseph's anguish, he says, would have irreparably damned the brothers in the eyes of the readers. But a different response comes from a Torah scholar named Dr. Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg. In her book, called The Murmuring Deep, she agrees with the Ramban that Joseph did cry out, did plead, but she suggests not that those pleas are obvious, but that no one was listening to them. The brothers turned a deaf ear to him. Rather than having a lev shomeah, they had instead a cold and unreceptive heart when it came to Joseph, which prevented them from hearing his pleading, his cries. If words don't reach the heart, there can be no hearing. There can be no action. Only when the brothers face the guilt of their past and recognize the tragedy of what they have done are they able to register the anguished crying that actually had occurred 22 years ago. Dr. Zornberg suggests that for the power of language to work, a listening other is required. So if no one is listening, it's as if nothing was said. We don't hear Joseph's cries until the brothers' hearts were finally listening, finally able to hear them. So this is the answer to the question of why the Eichmann trial is considered to be the event that broke the silence of the survivors when there had been no silence. Immediately after the Holocaust, the survivors spoke, but no one was ready to hear them. It wasn't until the trial when the man in the glass booth gave evil a face, when 90 survivors, can you imagine? 90 survivors told their stories powerfully and publicly in a court of law. And when the whole world saw that justice was possible, that people listened and were able to hear survivors' stories with a full heart. Dr. Lipstadt explained that after the Eichmann trial, the story of the Holocaust, though it had previously been told and discussed, was heard in a profoundly different way. The telling may not have been new, but the hearing was. Jews around the world celebrated the holiday of Purim last week. What does this holiday have to do with listening? Well, Purim tells the story of the evil Haman and his plan to annihilate all of the Jews of Persia until the beautiful Esther risks her life to plead with the king, the only one who can stop the slaughter. Had the king, Ahasuerus, not listened to Esther's plea, many of us would not be alive today to tell the story. But listening is only half of the reciprocal communication. Speaking so that we can touch another's heart is the other half. Had Esther been unable to communicate her anguish and fear in a way that would reach the king's heart, he would have turned her away. Some Jews might hear the Purim story differently now as we read it in the aftermath of the tragedy of October 7th for the second time. On Purim, Esther, with God's hidden help, saved the Jews from slaughter. On October 7th, Hamas did not. In Esther's time, we went from knowing the threat of immediate annihilation to seeing the destruction of our enemies, the very people who wanted us dead, and we experienced the joy of freedom. But today, we don't feel free. Many of us suffer from anxiety and grief. In a historic high, over 10,000 anti-Semitic acts have been documented in America since October 7th. Fear and distress hang over numbers of Jewish communities, including mine in New Jersey, and thousands of Jewish students on college campuses, including my 2 granddaughters at Columbia University. Anti-Semitic speech and actions continue despite the countless words we've spoken about the dangers of hate speech and the pleas we've made for help, for rationality. But who is hearing us? If the demonstrators aren't hearing our cries, it's as if we haven't called out. There's a stunning novel called A Paragon by the author Colin McCann. In the novel, Rami Elchanan, an Israeli whose 12-year-old daughter Smadar was murdered in a terrorist bombing, and Bassam Aramim, a Palestinian whose 10-year-old daughter Abir was killed by an Israeli's rubber bullet, become close friends over the course of a dozen years as they meet in a parents' peace group for bereaved parents. Rami rides a motorcycle. On the back of it is a sign that reads, "It will not be over until we talk." And this mantra is repeated throughout this powerful book. But the book was written before October 7th. How can we learn to talk now to each other in a way that will enable us to hear one another? How can we help the anti-Semites become the listening others that we so desperately seek? In our troubled world, what can we say? And how and to whom can we say it? I have no doubt that these questions plagued the pastor. What had he advised? What would he say today? We all wish he were here to help us now. Finally, we can use the story of Joseph and the story of the trial of Adolf Eichmann to understand that if we don't listen to what our brothers and sisters, students and congregants, elderly shoppers in the Jerusalem market, Holocaust survivors, and now those who survived October 7th are telling us, it's as if they haven't spoken. We can learn to be the listening other, to the one who cries out, to the one who tells her story. And we can learn, like Esther and like Pastor Chris, to speak in ways that allow others to listen and to hear us. The students in the Jerusalem Shuk learned to hear the more they listened fully, and they benefited immensely from the connections they made. Joseph's brothers learned to hear through accepting the reality of what they had done, and the course of Jewish history was positively affected. Pastor Chris, as a young boy, listened with his whole heart to his neighbor's story, and the story took root in his soul and set him on a path of learning. The world learned to hear the survivors through balancing the knowledge of the tragedy with the pride of Israeli strength and justice, and we have all benefited from knowing survivors. The Vietnamese writer Viet Thanh Nguyen summarizes my point. He writes, "Not everyone will listen. caught up in the noise, but enough might. Those who do not listen will never know what those who listen do, that it is the listening itself that matters, that listening is what connects us to others and to ourselves. May we be able to listen to and to connect with our spouse, our children, our colleagues, our friends, Jews, Christians, Muslims alike, our few remaining Holocaust survivors, and all of the survivors of October 7th as they tell us their harrowing experiences. By such listening, may we be able to discover and appreciate their unique ways of being in the world. May we, in tribute to Pastor Chris Anderson, be able to tune into and touch each other's heart as we listen closely and really hear and respond. Thank you.
We have proclaimed together our faith in the one God, ground and nurturer of us all. Now as we leave this place, we continue to remember, and we keep marching on, continuing to work for justice and peace. The future demands that we keep marching on. The future demands that we continue to remember and educate as we pass on the torch of this work to those who come after us. Before we go our separate ways again, let us extend to one another a sign of reconciliation, expressing our hope for peace.
In just a moment, those who wish to take care or have a piece of the bread. Bread was very important to Pastor Anderson. He would give lectures on how it was a religious experience. And for those in the Christian community, that when you make the bread, you hit it or shape it, and then you let it stay for a while, and then you let it rise up. It was for him a very experience of, for him, resurrection, for him, what his Maker made for him. Almighty God, we call you by different names. We here have different traditions. Some of us don't believe in much of anything except the possibility of humanity coming together to work in harmony. Karen gave us such a wonderful talk today about the listening heart, and we have such a great example in Pastor Chris Anderson. Unfortunately, we can't talk to him words or hug him anymore, but we can use our own hearts to listen. And Pastor Anderson did this not only for the Jewish community. He would take his youth groups to the plains of North Dakota and South Dakota to help the Native Americans who were marginalized and had very, very little. He gave them hope. He listened to their stories, and those, including Salansa, heard it and continued to share that message. May we, as we break bread together, as we say shalom together, have Pastor Chris' inspiration serve as an inspiration for not only for us to listen, but to share and try to do it in such a way it will be touching others' hearts. And together we say, Amen. And I have no right to do this, but I think the music was exceptional. And for those that don't know, Pastor Ellen Chefs, Ellen, you want to raise your hands? Well, you can do one. And the ensemble, the musician, I think they deserve another round of applause. After you, if you'd like to take a piece of bread, to our left is the social hall, and between the members of the board of the Anderson Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies and the church, there are, in case you're concerned, there is fruit as well as cookies and even non-sugar cookies. So I think, let's see, Karen as our guest. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Praise to you, Almighty God, who causes the bread to form from the earth and to sustain us. Yeah, just okay, so thank you. I think unless Paula, is there anything else? Or Ellen? Okay.
I am just extremely grateful again for everyone here. We're all a part of a bigger story. And I am so grateful to hear all of the stories, and I think so necessary for intergenerational people to come together and share our stories. Thank you, Rabbi, and all of you for coming.
So you want to show them where to go?
I will, if you'd like to follow me.
Great job.